where you started, where you are, and where you're going to be.
And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on the Voices for Victory podcast, where today we are very lucky to be joined by legendary broadcaster Johnny Holliday. Johnny, thanks so much for coming on and chatting with us today.
Nick, thank you for having me. Nice to be with you guys.
And there's a lot I want to get into as someone who grew up in the Northern Virginia, D.C. area. I've been hearing your voice for many years. My mom is a Maryland graduate, so I want to get into a lot of that stuff with you. But first off, I know the reason we're here talking today, of course, at the V Foundation, we want to talk to people who've been affected by cancer and whose families have been affected by cancer. And I know that's something that your family had to go through, like many other families have unfortunately had to go through. Can you just walk our listeners through how cancer has affected your family?
Well, I think, Mick, like anybody, when you get the word that one of your grandkids has been hit with cancer, it throws everything into turmoil. I'll never forget my little grandson Jack Raleigh was 10 years old, and his mom is my daughter's a NICU nurse, so she pretty much picked up on that things weren't normal with him when he was 10. This is back in 2009, and he kept getting up and going to the bathroom at night, which was unusual, 3 or 4 or 5 times for a little 10-year-old kid. So she took him in to be checked out, and at Children's Hospital, they discovered here in Washington, they discovered that something was on the pituitary gland, and they weren't sure what it was. They were going to watch it for a while, so they watched it for like 6 months or so, and it kept getting bigger and bigger. And finally, they came to the determination: let's go to have a biopsy made and see exactly what's going on. And so May 10th of 2009, he was up at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, and they did the biopsy, and it came back positive. It was a tumor on the pituitary gland. And when I went up to be with my daughter and her husband's an attorney. My son-in-law is an attorney. And attorneys are always in control of everything. Now, all of a sudden, you're not in control of this at all. It's all in the doctor's hands, the nurse's hands, the expert's hands at Children's Hospital. And luckily, Tracy had been a NICU nurse at Children's for a while, and she knew the oncologist, she knew who the people were to contact. And when I got to the hospital and I opened up, the elevator door opened up, and my youngest daughter, was standing there with tears rolling down her face, and I knew that it was not good. And my son-in-law and my daughter were in a room together with the doctors, and I've never seen my son-in-law that emotional and kind of like almost out of control. So they sat with the doctors and they talked about what they were going to do. And when I walked out of the room after seeing them and hugging both of them, and they wheeled my grandson by and with this gigantic bandage over his head. And what's interesting, I found very interesting, when they do a biopsy on the pituitary gland, they went in through the eyebrow to make the incision to just get a snippet of the tumor and to see what it was, either benign or malignant. And I'll never forget the feeling when they went by on that stretcher. If I could have jumped on that stretcher, I would have done so like that to take this little kid's place. So when he got out of the hospital after the biopsy, they sat down with the doctors. And Dr. Roger Packer, phenomenal doctor at Children's, sat down with Jack and said, Jack, what do you think of when you hear the word cancer? And Jack's reaction was, well, like any 10-year-old kid, well, I guess I'm going to die. Dr. Packer said, you are never to use that word again. My children do not die. You are not. We're going to work on this thing. We're going to beat this thing. And he said, do you have any questions? And Jack said, yeah. Am I going to lose my hair? Well, you might. Then again, you may not. So Jack's reaction was, I was going to get a crew cut anyhow, so it doesn't really matter. So Dr. Packer said, what are your plans for the summer? And Jack said, well, I was going to go to golf camp down in Pinehurst, North Carolina, but I guess I can't go now. He said, oh, no, no, no. We're going to work these treatments around you. You don't change anything. And that was a tremendous comfort for my grandson to know that he was going to lead a normal life in amongst the treatments. So he went through 17 rounds of chemo children's. And then in September of 2009, they got him in Mass General Hospital up in Boston for radiation, a proton which went right to the tumor without destroying any other organs. They couldn't operate on it. And they laid the cards on the table. They said, okay, here's the percentage of it being successful. But we're going to go for it. And it was. It kept diminishing and diminishing and smaller and smaller and smaller, and finally wiped it out. So Jack is now 21, almost 22 years old, cancer-free, and knock on wood, hope it stays that way. But it just upset, like any family with cancer, it just destroys everybody. And you have to put your hands and you have to put your faith in the doctors and nurses who know more than we do to get everybody through this. But it's an emotional roller coaster nobody should have to go through. Nobody.
Yeah, and first of all, I'm thankful that Jack is doing great, and that's wonderful to hear. That's one of the things I found from this job and talking to some kids who've had to go through cancer is the strength of the kids is unbelievable. That you see these 8, 10, 12-year-olds who are going through something that no kid should have their life upended with what they have to go through. You know, it's not easy, but it's easy to say, oh, they had 17 treatments and not think about what that meant and and I'm sure you saw it as being around the family, what that did to him. But the strength of these kids, and it sounds like Jack was the same way. You know, I'm going to get a crew cut. I love that. The strength of these kids to go through this is just unbelievable to me. It's really crazy.
He was amazing, Mick, that he told the doctors later on, I think you misdiagnosed me. And they said, really? You think you went through all this treatment and we misdiagnosed you? He said, yeah. But he never ever thought, he didn't know how serious it was when you're 10 years old. So you do basically what the doctors tell you to do. So he was fortunate to go to the Greg Norman Charity Golf Tournament down in Naples, Florida. And he was the guest speaker at 10 years old. And he had to tell people, Greg Norman said, I'd love to have you and your family come down and be my guest for the weekend for my shark shootout golf tournament. But I want you to do something for me. I want you to give a talk about how you are beating cancer. And Jack said, yeah, sure, no problem. And I also knew you're an excellent golfer, so I want you to give a clinic with me and Bubba Watson and Ricky Fowler. Oh, yeah, sure. I'm thinking, what? A 10-year-old kid with Greg Norman, Ricky Fowler, and Bubba Watson at a golf tournament? But he just did it like it was just routine. And then he made a point of anytime people ask him to speak, he said, yeah, because I can maybe help families who've gone through what my family went through. And I can connect with young kids who are my age and tell them, you have to have a tough mental attitude, number one. You have a tremendous support system, number two. Faith in God, number three. And it's going to be okay. And I'll never forget, he told us the story when he went to Boston for the radiation. And they took him to a Boston college football game. He and all the other kids on the oncology floor went up there. And they're on the sidelines, and he's the only guy with a Maryland sweatshirt on the sidelines at a Boston College football game. And he and all the other, maybe 10 patients are on the sideline. And this big guy comes up and kneels down and says, boy, cancer sucks, doesn't it, guys? And all the kids said, yeah. They had the caps on and, the jackets on and all. And so he said, yeah, I know, it's pretty tough. I got it too. And they looked at this guy and said, you got cancer like we do? Yeah. Mark Herzlich. now played in the NFL, Boston College linebacker at that time, had bone cancer in his right leg. And he connected with these kids, and I think that lifted everybody's spirits. They said, "Wow, you're like us? Yeah, just like you, but I'm beating it just like you guys are. Just like you guys are." So Jack goes around giving speeches. He gave one last year at a golf tournament last year at age 21. He said it was tougher than when he was 10 years old because now he knows what he went through. Much more difficult to express his feelings. He got more emotional this time than he did at the one at the Greg Norman tournament. And but I said, don't stop giving talks. Keep on talking about how your experience, what it was like, how you did it, how you kept a tough mental attitude, how you never thought you were going to lose this battle. And that's so very, very important. But as you said, Mick, little kids are amazing. They're absolutely incredible when it comes to focus and vision and planning ahead. I wish I had the same thing these kids had.
Yeah, and I think it's something we talk about a lot too here is when we encourage someone to share their story, because it does help. People who are going through this want to hear from someone who went through something similar to what they went through. A kid wants to hear from another kid who went through this, and that's something we talk a lot about with Dick Vitale and all the amazing work that he does for the V Foundation, raising money for pediatric cancer awareness. He has these kids he's built relationships with who have gone through cancer and are willing to come out and share their story and talk to other kids. And he is, as you know, Johnny, the most passionate and upbeat and outgoing guy there is. But he encourages these kids to share their story, because if sharing your story helps one kid have a better day, it's worth it, right? I mean, that's the big thing that we've talked about a lot.
Yeah, exactly, and that's exactly what Jack did. You can go to YouTube and you can see his speeches on YouTube. Just type in Jack Rolle, Rolle, Shark Shootout. Up will come the video of him speaking at the Greg Norman tournament, and he got through the whole. I read it and I started crying, and I told him. He said, "What do you mean you started?" I said, "Well, it's pretty emotional." "No, it's not. He's 10 years old." I said, here's what's going to happen. When you get to this part of your speech, they're going to laugh. You get to this part, they're going to be very quiet. When you get to this part, they're going to start crying, the audience. "No, they're not." Boom, in one ear and out the other ear. It's exactly what happened. And at the end of his talk, he got a standing ovation from 500 people. And the first person, then he started crying. He got so emotional. And Greg Norman went over, put his arm around him, walked him back to the table to assure him things were okay. But then when he gave the talk like last year, it was very, very difficult for him. But he mixes up some humor with funny things that happen and some serious things that happen too. And his bottom line is, he said, no kid should ever have to go through what I went through or what the kids today are going through. And that's why it's important, as you mentioned, Mick, people like Dick Vitale, you can't put into words what he means for the Jimmy V Foundation. And look of all the people, look what he got hit with, cancer himself. The biggest ambassador in the world for the Jimmy V Foundation is Dick Vitale. And we should all do as best we can to emulate what he's done, and to make people aware that you have to have a good support system, number one, and keep this thing at a positive attitude, number two.
Yeah, and it sounds like your grandson, when he's putting a speech together, I heard laugh, I heard maybe spend some time in thought, I heard cry.
Oh yeah,
that sounds like the Jim Valvano mode of speech giving, the laugh, think, and cry, make it a heck of a day, right? So
yeah,
I'll pivot there to Coach Valvano. You've been around college athletics for many years. I think 1979 when you became the voice of Maryland football and men's basketball. You've seen it all when it comes to that. So what was your impression when you came into the ACC of Coach Valvano, and sort of obviously you're around the ACC and the run in '83. What was your impression of Jim Valvano when you were there?
Well, on every one of our pregame shows, we always interview the Maryland coach and the opposing coach if he's available and if he's allowed to talk. And Coach Valvano was without question the best interview of anybody we did in the ACC. I Greg Manning was doing the games with me during those days, who played at Maryland, and we'd sit down in coach's office at North Carolina State, and we would talk about this and that, everything but basketball, about him growing up in New York and his basketball days in high school and so forth. And finally, I would say, "Hey, coach, we got to go on the air in about 30 minutes. Can we do this?" And oh yeah, sure, yeah, because we got to talk to him for hours. And one funny story: when he came up to Maryland to play a game, we do the pregame interview, and I asked him. I said, "Coach, what's your main focus? What's your biggest concern about this game tonight against the Terrapins?" He said, "I'll be quite honest with you. My biggest concern is, will I have a place to sit on the bench? Because we have a lot of coaches, a lot of assistant coaches. We have more assistant coaches than probably anybody in basketball. All these guys are dressed immaculately in suits and ties, but so I sometimes I don't have a place to sit. That's my biggest concern." So as we get close to game time, here come the coaches for NC State in front of our broadcast spot, all walking down to the other end of the floor and sit down. And Valvano comes by, knocks in front of me and says, "Watch, I don't think I have a place to sit." This is before the game now. So, he walks all the way down, and I just happen to glance down, and he's going, "There's nowhere to sit." I mean, that was him. At the Los Angeles Olympics, he was our analyst for ABC Sports, and I was covering for ABC. So every night, we'd sit around the pool at the hotel, and we'd recap his day at the basketball arena. And to just hear him tell stories about games, about players, about fans, about arenas was just mesmerizing for everybody. And he was so special and just one of a kind that I can close my eyes and hear him talking right now. And I can also close my eyes and see that speech he gave at the ESPY Awards when Vitale helped him up to the stage and he gave the famous "Don't Ever Give Up" speech, which will never, ever be forgotten by anybody. We all miss him dearly. Quite a guy.
And I didn't realize you had actually had the interactions with him at the Olympics with ABC. Yeah. That's very cool. And I was going to ask you about that, Johnny, because for me growing up, I certainly knew you as the voice of Maryland, and listened to you many times on a lot of Maryland games. Usually with my parents being frustrated at some sort of ending that happened with the Terps, but you've had a amazing career of different opportunities of events you've had a chance to call and big moments in sports that you've been around. Do you have maybe a most memorable moment? I guess maybe with your connection to Maryland, it's probably the national championship, getting to call that in 2002. But is there like a big event that stands out that you're like, wow, I'm so lucky to have had a chance to be involved with that?
Well, I think there's a couple of them, Mick. I never won the national championship. It's tough to top that. And when we were in the ACC, anytime we beat Duke, that was a monumental, that was a real, plus right there. Especially to win at Cameron like that, because Cameron and still is one of the toughest places to play. I think in football, when we beat NC State to win the ACC championship in a last-second pass to Julian Gary on the road down there at Carter Finley Stadium, that was one of the highlights. I think in baseball, probably with the Washington Nationals, the pre and post game that I did with Ray Knight for 13 years, and they finally win the World Series. And to get a World Series ring, which is something I'll, treasure forever, and to do that was one of the highlights of my career. And I think just working with the various people that I worked with over the years, the Joe Theismanns, the Rick Barrys, the Paul Hornings, all the people I've had a chance to interview. I keep telling people I've never worked a day in my life. I've got the best seat in the house right there in the middle of the floor for basketball, up in a press box for football, free food, free beverages throughout the game. And it's kind of like a dream come true for a kid from Miami, Florida, who, had no idea what he wanted to do with his life and just kind of backed into a lot of things. And of course, all the Olympic Games that I covered for ABC, Sarajevo and Calgary and Barcelona and Sydney, Australia, Sapporo, Japan, Seoul, South Korea, Los Angeles, Atlanta, all those games, you can't put in words what those things have meant to me when I think back in my memory bank of all the things that I've been lucky to do. And I think in our business, it's certainly not a matter of how good you are, it's how lucky you are and being at the right place at the right time. And you've got to take advantage of a situation and an opportunity. And I've been able to do that, knock on wood, for 66 years. And I started in 1956 as a disc jockey. And then being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that's pretty special too.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty cool.
Yeah, not bad.
So, of course, we're at the V Foundation. We're located down here just outside of Raleigh in the heart of ACC country. And, I think people certainly my age and older grew up with Maryland in the ACC as part of that core group of ACC teams. So I know for me personally, I think for a lot of fans, when they left for the Big Ten, it was sort of a shock to the system. Obviously, the conference had grown at that point. It wasn't the traditional ACC anymore, but Maryland not being there was certainly a big difference for a lot of big, diehard ACC fans. So for you being associated, I want to ask you, one, what's the thing maybe you miss most about Maryland in the ACC? And then two, what's something that you've been just really happy with in terms of the move to the Big Ten and what's gone so well for them with that?
What I miss most about 35 years in the ACC is the people. The arenas, the coaches, the players, a lot of the fans, the restaurants to go to, the airports. It's that familiar. You get the familiar comfort you have, and we had for all those years. And the thing I miss about it the most, Mick, is the Maryland fans no longer can drive to 5 or 6 games like they could when we were in the ACC. You go to Virginia, Wake Forest, State, Duke, Carolina, no problem. You can make it a day trip, an overnight trip, and you can drive. And now you can drive to Rutgers and you can drive to Penn State, and that's about it. And you have to fly to all these other places. And I think the fans got shortchanged on the move to the Big Ten, only because of proximity of all the arenas we have to go to. The thing I like about the Big Ten is it was certainly it's a dollar thing. It's all a money thing, and that's why they made the move. Plus, they made the move because of the Big Ten network, which covers the entire country. So no matter where you are, you can watch a Big Ten game, something when we left the ACC they didn't have. Now, of course, they do with the ACC network, which is great for them, really great. I like the exposure we have in the Big Ten. I like the fact that you can go to Penn State and you got 100,000 people watching you play. Same goes for Ohio State. Same goes for Michigan. And Michigan State is like 80,000 or so. All these tremendous, tremendous facilities that your kids and your players are going to have exposure that they wouldn't have gotten in the ACC. So that's just some of the things. It has taken some time to get used to it because you're the new guy on the block coming in. So you have to show that you can do the job, that you are just as good as they are, and it's taken some time. And in the ACC, we had so many buddies doing games. For NC State, you got Gary, and you got at Carolina the great Woody Durham, who right behind me as you can see that picture of Woody. And at Wake Forest, you got Stan Cotton. You got all these guys that you still connect with. And that's what I really miss the most. I miss the camaraderie with those guys, the fact that we would always get together. Woody would always come in our booth to say hello before a game. The same thing at NC State when Wally was doing the games. And when I started, Gene Overby was doing the games at Wake Forest when I started. And some of those guys have passed on, but I have so many great memories of how nice they were and how welcoming they were to me. When I started in '79, the door was open. Everybody embraced us. It's been a little tougher in the Big Ten, I'll be quite honest with you. And there's not as many guys that I'm close with as I was with everybody in the ACC. It seemed like every school we connected with. And now, and I understand that because we're new and we have to earn our way. But there are a lot of pluses of being in the Big Ten, a lot of them. Was that a
Um,
diplomatic answer?
no, it was great, Johnny. I wanted to give you the positives of the ACC and the Big Ten, so you didn't get in
Yeah.
trouble with
A
anybody.
lot
So
of
that was great.
positives in
Uh,
the ACC, believe me.
yeah. I want to ask you about the big news at Maryland is the new men's head basketball coach, Kevin Willard, coming in from Seton Hall. It's not a very common thing at Maryland to have a new men's basketball coach, right? I mean, between Gary Williams and Mark Turgeon covers more than 30 years, with just those two. They're not a school that bounces around between coaches very often. So I assume you had a chance to chat with Kevin since he came in. If so, what was it like to chat with him? What do you expect with him as the coach at Maryland? And if not, what do you just from knowing what he's done previously at Seton Hall? What do you expect?
Well, I've gone through Lefty when Lefty was coaching, then Bob Wade for a couple of years, which didn't turn out too well, and then Gary for 23 years, and then Mark Turgeon for 10 years or 11 years, and now Kevin Willard. So four guys in my 43 years that I've been working for. I really like Kevin Willard. I really like him. He reminds me a lot of Gary, and there's also some similarities, I think, to Mark Turgeon. Uh, a lot of people didn't connect with Mark. I don't know why. Uh, all he did was win 20 plus games most of his years at Maryland. The fan base is pretty tough. The fan base at every school is tough. All they want is a winning team. And if you're not winning, they're going to let you hear about it. So with Kevin Willard, he comes from Seton Hall. He had a wonderful record up there. He had tremendous players he took and made them even better. And the thing that impressed me most about him when he had his press conference in Maryland to introduce him about a month ago was he said, I want to bring the culture back. I want to get that swagger back. And in the first row of the press conference, sitting Gary Williams, he said, I want my teams to be just like Gary Williams. And he said, when they won the national championship in 2002, as everybody knows, there wasn't one single high school All-American in that team. It was just a bunch of guys that blended together, blue-collar workers just like Gary Williams. And I think these guys are going to reflect Kevin Willard just like the 2002 team that won it all reflected Gary Williams. I like his approach. I like his honesty. Excuse me. I like his toughness. He's from New York guy. And I think it's going to be a wonderful hire. It may not happen overnight because he has a lot of rebuilding to do because you couldn't recruit anybody. And Danny Manning did a phenomenal job of taking a very difficult situation, making it into a positive situation while he filled in until they found Kevin Willard. And I think hats off to Danny Manning for keeping the whole program together. So I think it was a good hire. And he just got a nice recruit the other day from Frederick, Maryland, went to IMG Academy down in Florida, a powerhouse of a basketball factory, who's going to join us, and grew up in the Baltimore area, and got a couple of good assistants. Both guys have Washington ties, and he wants to recruit in the Washington, D.C. area because of so many great high school basketball programs there are here with the WCAC conference and with independent schools as well. So I think it's going to be a nice relationship, and I think he's going to be here for a long, long time.
Well, I think I speak for most big college basketball fans, and I'm certainly included in that group. And down here, as you know, in the triangle, college basketball reigns king. But the sport is better when Maryland is good. I believe that. I'm a little biased, as I said. My parents are diehard, so if you could just let Kevin Willard know to turn around as quickly as possible, it would make my life a lot easier. So my parents would let.
How'd you like to do the games? It'll make my life easier too.
Oh, that's great. Well, yeah, no, certainly, Johnny, thank you so much for coming by, for sharing some stories, for telling us a little bit about Jack and everything he went through. It's great to hear that he is still sharing his story too. Again, we talked about, I think it's so important. And I love that he's really embraced the laugh, think, cry of the speeches that he's given is really cool. So thank you again for coming on, Johnny, and sharing your family story.
Well, Mick, thanks for having me. And I can't tell you how much I admire the work that all you guys do at the Jimmy V Foundation. It's incredible. And one of these days, hopefully in my lifetime, maybe we'll see a cure to cancer where no kid will have to go through what my grandson has gone through and so many other kids, and then adults as well. Wipe out cancer. Let's do the best we can to continue that fight. And thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
We're going to keep working hard to make sure that happens, Johnny.
Okay.
Thank you again.
You bet.